Richard Gere and Julia Roberts were never supposed to be Hollywood's perfect couple. Yet in 1990, when Pretty Woman hit theaters, the world believed they had witnessed something more than acting. The chemistry was undeniable, the tenderness too raw, the laughter too unforced. On screen it looked like love. Off screen it left questions that never went away. For Julia Roberts, just 21, the role was a gamble that could have ruined her career. For Richard Gere, already 40 and restless, it was a chance he almost turned down. But the moment they were put together, something shifted. The film became a phenomenon. Roberts became a star. Gere was reborn. And for 35 years, fans have wondered if what they saw between them was a script or a confession. Through it all, Gere stayed quiet. He praised Roberts in public, smiled at reunions, but never revealed the full story. Until now. At 75, he has finally admitted the truth about Julia Roberts. So what happened between them that he kept hidden for decades? Why does he still carry the ache of it after all these years? And why does Julia Roberts remain, even today, the name that hurts to say aloud? When Pretty Woman was first pitched in Hollywood, no one imagined it would become the defining romantic comedy of its era. The script was darker, closer to a cautionary tale than a fairy tale. Studios hesitated. Executives shuffled through names for the leads, uncertain of the right match. Richard Gere was on the list, but uninterested. He had built his career on intensity, American Gigolo, An Officer and a Gentleman, films that painted him as distant, even untouchable. The idea of playing a corporate raider softened by love seemed beneath him. Julia Roberts, meanwhile, was barely out of her teens, a small name in a big city, carrying the weight of failed auditions and near misses. Casting her was seen as a gamble. The turning point came not in a boardroom, but in a small audition room where Roberts was asked to read with Gere. He didn't want to be there. She was nervous, too young, unproven. Yet something happened when the two locked eyes. Director Gary Marshall would later recall that the room shifted. Gere's reluctance melted. Roberts stopped fidgeting. They began playing with the lines, improvising, letting laughter break through the script. By the time Roberts scribbled a note, "Please say yes," and slid it across the table to Gere, the decision was sealed. It wasn't just casting, it was chemistry. Filming began with skepticism from the studio. No one believed a 40-year-old leading man and a 21-year-old newcomer could carry such a delicate balance. Yet within days, doubt turned to awe. Gere's performance softened in ways no one expected. The guarded, steely exterior he was known for gave way to warmth and vulnerability. Roberts, meanwhile, bloomed under his presence. She had been on the verge of being replaced by more experienced actresses, but beside Gere she found an ease that allowed her natural charm to take over. Scenes that were meant to be scripted tightly began to loosen. The piano moment where Gere plays and Roberts unexpectedly perches on top wasn't planned. It became iconic because of the comfort they shared. As weeks passed, cast and crew whispered about what they were seeing. The laughter between takes didn't feel rehearsed. The gentle way Gere touched Roberts' arm, the way she leaned in when he spoke, it was different. Marshall allowed it to breathe, sensing that the magic wasn't in the script, but in the space between them. What should have been just another studio romance became something richer, layered with a tenderness that audiences would later describe as too real. When the film premiered, the reaction was electric. Critics were divided on the story itself, but united in their praise of the pairing. Viewers left theaters convinced they had witnessed something personal. Women saw Roberts not as an actress but as a mirror of themselves, discovering love where it seemed impossible. Men saw Gere as both powerful and disarmed, a man undone by something greater than himself. The box office numbers soared, and with them Julia Roberts became a star overnight. Richard Gere, who had once dismissed the role, suddenly found himself at the center of a cultural event that defined his legacy. For Gere, it was a rebirth. For Roberts, it was a launch. But for both, it was something harder to explain. Decades later, Roberts admitted she felt safe with Gere, a rare admission in an industry where youth is often exploited. Gere, for his part, would call Roberts his most important partner on screen. The film changed everything: their careers, their reputations, and the way they would forever be linked. And yet, behind the applause, there was a lingering shadow. What the audience felt wasn't simply the magic of Hollywood. It was the spark of something left unfinished, a bond that never crossed into real life. If the connection was so powerful, why didn't Richard Gere and Julia Roberts ever become more than co-stars? The answer reveals the hidden barriers that kept them apart. When filming moved deeper into production, the closeness between Richard Gere and Julia Roberts became impossible to ignore. From the very first week, their interactions extended beyond rehearsed lines. Gere, known for his intensity and reserve, surprised the crew by opening up in her presence. He laughed more freely, lingered between takes, and seemed to drop the armor that had defined him for years. Roberts, barely out of her teens, was navigating a set filled with seasoned professionals. Yet she carried herself differently when Gere was near, as though his presence steadied her in ways she could not explain. There was no calculation in their connection. Unlike many Hollywood partnerships, where chemistry is manufactured through long rehearsals or publicity strategies, theirs unfolded naturally. A hand on the shoulder during a tense scene, a glance that lingered longer than necessary. Small, unscripted moments that carried more weight than the dialogue itself. These became the heartbeat of Pretty Woman. Robert's wide-eyed innocence found balance in Gere's measured calm. His quiet restraint drew energy from her playful spark. What should have felt like contrast instead became harmony. Stories from the set confirm this unusual dynamic. During breaks, Roberts would often drift toward Gere rather than retreat to her trailer. He listened when she fretted over scenes, offering gentle encouragement that carried more authority than any director's note. When Gere doubted his own choices, she reminded him of the impact he had on her, sometimes with nothing more than a smile. Crew members spoke of watching them as if they were witnessing a private exchange, something that didn't need words to be understood. The contrast between their personal lives and their on-screen bond deepened the intrigue. Gere was already navigating adulthood with its complications, relationships, and the pressures of being a mature leading man in a youth-obsessed industry. Roberts, by comparison, was still adjusting to sudden fame, dealing with the insecurity of being cast alongside older, established stars. Yet instead of these differences creating distance, they drew closer. It was as if the age gap created a space where each offered what the other lacked. He gave stability, she gave spontaneity. What made their bond unusual was the way it transcended performance. For most actors, the line between role and reality is sharp. Scenes end, scripts close, and the energy fades. For Gere and Roberts, that line blurred. The tenderness carried over into real moments. Crew recalled her laughter echoing through the soundstage whenever he improvised. He, in turn, admitted years later that she was the one who drew out a softer side of him that audiences rarely saw before. Their interactions did not go unnoticed by outsiders. Gossip circulated. Fans speculated. Journalists pressed them for answers in interviews. Yet neither gave the public anything beyond polite admiration. They shielded what was happening, guarding it as something fragile, unwilling to let Hollywood spin it into rumor or scandal. To the outside world, they were simply co-stars who worked well together. To those who looked closer, it was clear something deeper was quietly at play. As filming wrapped, there was an unspoken recognition that the bond they had built would not be easily repeated. Roberts would go on to other roles, other leading men, yet none carried the same weight in her career. Gere, too, continued to act alongside talented actresses, but he always returned to describing Roberts as singular. The connection they shared was not just about the success of one film, it was about the discovery of a rare comfort, the kind that doesn't fade with time. Still, with chemistry so strong and affection so evident, Why did Gere and Roberts never step beyond the boundary of friendship? The reasons lay in timing, circumstance, and choices that shaped the rest of their lives. For millions of fans, the question never faded. If Richard Gere and Julia Roberts shared such undeniable chemistry, why didn't they ever become a couple? The answer lies in the complicated reality of their lives at the time, realities that rarely matched the fairy tales they created on screen. When Pretty Woman wrapped in 1990, Roberts' world shifted almost overnight. She had gone from relative obscurity to one of the most famous women in the world. Every magazine cover carried her smile. Every headline speculated about her romances. But with fame came chaos. She was engaged to actor Kiefer Sutherland, only to call it off days before the wedding in a storm of tabloid frenzy. She then fled the spotlight, leaving reporters scrambling to make sense of her choices. At just 21, she was already carrying the burden of being labeled America's sweetheart, while privately she struggled to find stability. Richard Gere, on the other hand, was navigating a very different stage of life. At 40, he was not chasing sudden fame. He had already built a career, already endured the pressures of being typecast as the mysterious leading man. He valued privacy, guarded his personal life fiercely, and carried the weariness of someone who knew how quickly Hollywood could consume relationships. To him, Roberts was radiant, but she was also a young woman standing on the edge of a storm he had no desire to step into. Their age difference added another quiet barrier. 2 decades may not matter in a script, but in reality it placed them at opposite ends of experience. Roberts was still finding her voice, her place, her identity. Gere was already established, craving steadiness rather than volatility. The idea of romance between them might have fueled headlines, but both understood it could also damage what they valued most, the authenticity of their connection. Timing was another factor. Roberts' relationships dominated the press throughout the early 90s. Every move she made was dissected, from her whirlwind marriage, to country singer Lyle Lovett, to her later high-profile romances. Gere, meanwhile, stepped into his own marriage with model Cindy Crawford, a union that drew constant attention due to their age gap and public image. While fans speculated endlessly about Roberts and Gere, their lives were already being pulled in different directions. There was also the weight of expectation. Had they become involved romantically, every reunion, every collaboration would have been clouded by gossip. Their bond, which thrived on ease and trust, could have fractured under the scrutiny. Instead, they made a quieter choice: protect what they had by not turning it into something that could be consumed and destroyed by the public. Years later, both would speak about each other with a tenderness that suggested something remained unsaid. Gere called Roberts his lucky charm, confessing she gave him a softness he never knew he had. Roberts described Gere as her leading man, not just in film but in life. These words carried weight, hinting at an affection that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. And yet, the truth is simpler than the myths. They cared deeply for each other, but they understood the cost of crossing the line. Sometimes the most powerful connections are not the ones lived out, but the ones preserved, untouched, unbroken, suspended in memory. Still, fate has a way of circling back. Decades later, when Gere and Roberts reunited publicly, audiences saw the spark return, proof that the story between them was never truly finished. By the time the 25th anniversary of Pretty Woman arrived in 2015, the world had changed. Julia Roberts was no longer the ingenue she once was. She was an Oscar winner, a mother, and a Hollywood icon in her own right. Richard Gere, now in his 60s, had built a life defined as much by activism and spirituality as by film. Yet when the two were brought back together to celebrate the film that had defined them, it was as if time folded in on itself. The reunion was staged on daytime television, a carefully arranged celebration that gathered Roberts, Gere, director Gary Marshall, and other cast members. The moment they entered the room, the years seemed to vanish. Roberts' face lit up the instant she saw him. Gere leaned in with the same warmth that had carried through their earliest days on set. Laughter came quickly, not forced or rehearsed, but easy, genuine. For audiences watching at home, it was like seeing old friends rediscover each other after decades apart. The interview began with nostalgia. They recounted stories from the filming, the improvisations, the moments that weren't in the script but became immortal. Gere joked about his reluctance to take the role. Roberts teased him about how she had convinced him. Yet beneath the laughter was something quieter, an affection that felt untouched by the years. Whenever one spoke, the other leaned in, their eyes locked, as if no one else in the room mattered. At one point, the host asked Gere what Roberts meant to him. His answer was immediate, unguarded. He called her his most important co-star, a phrase that carried weight precisely because it was so rare for Gere to speak in absolutes. Roberts, smiling, returned the sentiment in her own way, calling him her leading man forever. The exchange lasted only moments, but for viewers, it spoke volumes. It wasn't the scripted praise of colleagues. It was something deeper, the kind of acknowledgement that slips through only when the guard is down. Fans erupted. Social media lit up with clips of the two laughing, smiling, touching hands. Many admitted they still hoped the pair would someday confess to more than friendship. The reunion rekindled the public's fascination with them, reminding everyone that the magic of Pretty Woman had never really faded. For Roberts and Gere, it was both a celebration and a reminder of a bond that defied explanation. What made the reunion poignant was what went unsaid. They didn't talk about why they had never been together, or whether there had ever been more behind the scenes. Instead, they let their body language, their shared smiles, and their words of respect speak for themselves. In some ways, the silence said more than any confession could. It left fans with the sense that the real story was too personal, too delicate to ever be reduced to headlines. For Gere, the moment seemed to stir something lasting. In later interviews, he admitted that Roberts had saved him as an actor, that working with her had changed the trajectory of his career. Roberts, too, has reflected on how secure she felt with him at a time when she was most vulnerable. Their words, years apart, form a mosaic of what they truly meant to one another, fragments of truth spread across decades. The reunion proved one thing beyond doubt: whatever they shared had not been a fleeting illusion. It had survived fame, marriages, divorces, and the relentless churn of Hollywood. And when they stood side by side again, the ache of what never was returned to the surface, visible to anyone who chose to look closely. But Richard Gere's most revealing words didn't come at that reunion. They came later, as he approached 75, when he finally allowed himself to admit why Julia Roberts still lingers in his heart, and why the truth, even now, still hurts. At 75, Richard Gere has reached a stage of life defined less by red carpets and more by reflection. He lives quietly now, splitting time between family, activism, and the simple rhythms of fatherhood. Yet when conversations turn to Julia Roberts, his tone shifts. There is a softness, a wistfulness that slips through, betraying what words alone cannot. She was not just a co-star. She was the pivot point of his career, and perhaps, in some unspoken way, his life. Gere has admitted that Roberts gave him something rare in Hollywood: safety. At a time when he was weary of roles that cast him as untouchable, she drew out a tenderness that surprised even him. He has described her presence as transformative, the reason he accepted Pretty Woman in the first place, and the reason it became the defining film of his career. For Gere, Roberts was more than an actress across the table. She was the partner who reminded him of the joy in acting, of what connection could look like when it was unforced. Roberts, in turn, has echoed those sentiments. She has spoken of Gere with reverence, calling him her leading man, confessing that he made her feel supported when she was too young to steady herself. The symmetry of their words, offered years apart in different interviews, with no fanfare, speaks to a truth that neither has ever denied outright. What they shared was real, it just wasn't lived out. That is the part that still stings. Gere has built a full life, with marriages, children, and causes that give him purpose. Roberts has done the same. And yet, when he reflects on his career, Julia Roberts is the name that rises above all others. He has called her the most important partner of his professional life, and he has done so with an almost startling honesty. The implication is clear: she represents not only the pinnacle of his work, but the what-if that lingers in the background of his story. It is not regret, in the traditional sense. Gere is not a man given to dwelling on lost romances or missed opportunities. But the ache in his words suggests a recognition that what they had was singular, that it could not be replicated with anyone else. That kind of bond leaves a mark. Even when unspoken, even when untouched, it follows you. And at 75, Gere no longer hides that truth. He admits it openly, because it no longer feels like scandal or gossip. It feels like history, his history. Fans often ask why it still hurts him. The answer may be simple: because some connections don't fade. They linger in memory, frozen in time, untouched by the years. Gere and Roberts captured lightning once, and in doing so, they tied themselves together forever. Not as lovers, not as spouses, but as something harder to define. A bond lived only on screen, yet carried in private hearts for decades. When Gere speaks of Roberts today, his eyes soften, his words slow. He is no longer the guarded actor of the 1980s, nor the distant star the press often portrayed. He is simply a man acknowledging the truth, that Julia Roberts gave him something no one else did, and that even now it matters. And that, perhaps, is the most poignant part of their story. The love that never was still shapes them both. A reminder that sometimes the deepest truths are not found in what we live, but in what we leave unsaid. Richard Gere and Julia Roberts never wrote a love story off-screen, yet their names remain inseparable. What began as a risky casting choice in a film no one expected to succeed became something larger than cinema. It became a touchstone for two lives, a bond that neither time nor distance has managed to erase. For Roberts, it was the role that transformed her from an uncertain newcomer into Hollywood's most beloved star. For Gere, it was the moment he rediscovered vulnerability, allowing himself to be seen in a way audiences had never witnessed before. Together, they created a love story so authentic that it blurred the line between acting and truth. Decades of speculation have not dulled the fascination. Fans still return to Pretty Woman not just for its story, but for the connection that radiates through every frame. And when Gere finally spoke openly, acknowledging Roberts as the most important partner of his career, it confirmed what so many had long suspected. The magic was real, the hurt was real, and the silence was, perhaps, its own confession. At 75, Gere's words carry the weight of time. They are not a revelation of scandal, but of memory. A quiet admission that what he shared with Julia Roberts endures not because of what happened, but because of what never did. It lingers in the space between possibility and reality, a reminder that some of the deepest stories are not about love fulfilled, but love imagined, preserved forever in the hearts of those who witnessed it. For Richard Gere, the truth about Julia Roberts is simple. She gave him the one thing that outlasted fame, applause, and decades of change. A connection too rare to fade, too fragile to define, and too powerful to forget. And that is why even now it still hurts. For more emotional stories, check out this video.